I really didn't know what I was walking into. Um, when I walked in there, I met a woman who was timid and who was exhausted. It looked like she had been crying quite a bit. She looked distraught.
She was 13 years old, and already pregnant. And nobody stopped it. That's not a headline. That's not a rumor somebody's spreading online. That's what prosecutors say happened to a girl named Elizabeth Siders, years before her name would end up on 16 counts of child endangerment. 16 children, one house, conditions investigators still won't fully describe on the record. And now, the question that could decide everything isn't did this happen? It's a stranger question, a colder one. Is she even capable of standing trial for it? Here's the thing though. Most people hear competency evaluation and picture some doctor asking a few questions in a quiet room. Sign here. Answer this. Done. That's not what it is. Not even close. What actually happens next is stranger than fiction, and once you understand it, you'll never look at a courtroom the same way again. Elizabeth's attorney sat across from her after the arrest and didn't see a monster. Listen to how she described it. A woman who was timid, exhausted, who looked like she'd been crying for days. That's the account from her own lawyer, not a sympathizer online, not a theory. Her lawyer. Now hold that image next to this one. 16 children. Conditions so bad investigators say they were caught off guard just walking through the door. Two pictures of the same woman. They don't fit together. And that gap, right there, that's where this whole case lives. So here's where it gets interesting. Before Elizabeth Siders can even enter a plea, before a jury ever hears a single word of testimony, the court has to answer one question first. Can she understand what's happening to her? Not is she guilty, not is she sorry. Can she understand it?
Well, and just to be clear for everyone, the difference between being incompetent and being insane, those two, just to help our viewers understand where we're going with this with Elizabeth, you have to be found competent in order to be found insane.
Correct. Competency is the earliest thing. Your lawyer is saying, hey, whoa, I need to make sure that my client knows what a plea bargain is. Like, does my client know what a jury is? Does my client know what a judge does? Does my client know what a lawyer does? Competency is that very initial piece. If you're found competent, then you get to put forward a plea and rationally, logically have a conversation with your lawyer about the truth and what you want to put forward with. And it does sound like insanity is what they're all going to put forward. So in a sense, they're all saying, yeah, we did that. We were there, but we're all insane.
If you were going into, to see Elizabeth and...
We talked to a forensic psychologist, Dr. Leslie Dobson, who spent years inside this exact system. And what she described sounds less like a courtroom and more like a stage play nobody outside the walls ever gets to watch. They build a fake courtroom inside a state hospital, a real trial room with real roles. A psychologist plays the judge, another plays the prosecutor, and the patients, the ones who are doing well, they play their own defense. They run the whole thing like a rehearsal, again and again, until the system decides you're ready for the real one.
To try and talk to her right now, what would that look like?
She's sitting in a jail cell. It doesn't sound like she's dangerous, so she's probably not cuffed, and she's probably in a small pod amongst other women, able to communicate. And so you would go in, and depending on the setting, you would either have a wall between you or a window, or you just go straight in, and she would be cuffed to the table. And you have to slowly understand their mindset. So can they rationally understand what is going on? Like, really, do you know what's happening right now? Let's just get down to the nitty gritty. And then can you factually understand? Do you know what a judge is? Do you know what the jury does? Can you communicate in a meaningful way with your lawyer? So you'd sit down and ask those questions. And my guess is that she's not competent because the lawyer pushed so hard and waited to put this in. So then what would happen is she'd likely be moved to a state hospital facility where they have these tracks for competency. And you go all the way through these courses where you're actually in a mock trial. So we set up a whole trial room. I acted as a DA or a prosecutor or a judge. The patients who were doing well would act in certain roles. And we try and see if you can get through putting your plea forward and you understand.
Okay, I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea you did all that.
It's, I mean, the patients had fun with it. A lot of the incompetent patients, when they were struggling, we could really identify where they were struggling and how. Sometimes it really came down to performance anxiety. Other times they were seriously mentally ill. But they have specific programs where that's all you talk about, that's all you do, that's all you work on until you're competent to go back to jail and go to trial.
I need you to sit with that for a second, because there's a version of Elizabeth Siders in a room right now, being coached through a pretend trial before anyone even decides if she's fit for the real one. And look, if she fails that test, if she can't demonstrate she understands what a judge does, what a jury does, what a plea even means, she doesn't just go home, but she doesn't stand trial either. She goes into a kind of legal limbo, one Dr. Dobson says can stretch on for years. Some defendants max out at 3 years of this process. 3 years, not 3 months. And some never become competent at all.
Long time. Sometimes, in California, sometimes you can tap out at 3 years.
I thought you were going to say like 3 months.
No, sometimes you may never be held accountable and you can be set free because you will never gain competency. It is a bit of a get out of jail free card when you are so mentally ill and unable to participate in your own criminal defense.
I mean, you're not getting your kids back. It's not like you're going back to your life, right?
Some do, but some are so intellectually unable to live their life that they can't have their children back. But I have seen people get out and stay out, and that's the sad part of our system. But people try to fake it all the time, and that's what we have to do, is we have to weed them out with significant testing. I mean, when you're in a state facility, 24/7, you're being watched. Everyone, we're rounding on you, and then we're talking about you, and there's layers of all of this. And then because it is legal, everybody wants to be careful, right? So we're documenting everything, and we do not allow the liars and the malingerers to stay in the state hospitals. So everything is about finding them and pushing them out.
If you're competent, then they're like, okay, we're going to trial. Like we're going back into court. We've done what we need.
They're simply never held accountable because the system has no path forward for them. That's not justice being served. That's justice being paused indefinitely for people the system can't figure out what to do with.
How often do these defendants usually restore their competency? Is it pretty common for defendants to get up to speed and be like, okay, I'm competent now?
I would say almost always. For intellectual disabilities, those are different lanes, and that might be a different type of housing that the individual goes to if they can't become competent.
And another really interesting thing, because I covered the one of the trials of Lori Vallow Daybell, the mom who took the lives of her 2 children who she had thought were zombies. And It took 2 years for them to get her competent, but she got competent. Even if you thought her kids were zombies, they were able to say, you're standing trial in 2023.
Right. Because it's not about if you're mentally sane or not. It's about the factual and rational understanding of the court and the process. So, does she think the judge is a zombie? Okay, cool, Lori. The judge is a zombie, but do you know what he does? Okay, he determines your sentencing.
Okay.
He listens to the jury. Okay, then you're competent.
So you don't have to be rational, or you can still have severe mental illness or personality disorders, but you know what a judge and a jury is, so you're going to trial.
Right.
Okay.
You have to be rational, but you can still be mentally ill and rational. It just doesn't matter if it's related to something other than trial and putting your plea forward.
But here's the question nobody's asking loud enough. What kind of woman was Elizabeth Siders before any of this? Married off at 15 to a man named Gary Siders Jr. by parents who signed the paperwork themselves. A child legally handing over her own daughter to become someone's wife.
To understand is also something that's very concerning. We're talking about a woman who at 13 is pregnant, according to prosecutors. She's married off at 15 by parents who sign off on the marriage license. Off she goes. And she's not an adult to be making these decisions either. I mean, that has got to play a role that as a child, she was brought into this situation. um, impregnated somehow, and then
Yeah.
like led into this like unbelievable, like just staying pregnant the whole time, the whole time.
The whole time.
How can we say to a woman like that, this is your fault?
Exactly. And I think it's not a question of humanity at this point, because you and I would be there
Pregnant
to.
again and again for years. Dr. Dobson put it plainly. Hormonally, psychologically, what does that even do to a person's mind when pregnancy is the only constant in their entire adult life? Was she a victim, held in place by coercion nobody outside that house could see?
Okay. So in Elizabeth Siders, this young woman who has basically been pregnant since, she was, I think, 13 years old. But at 15, she gets married off to a man named Gary Siders Jr., who were learning about this family. And of course, when they found her children, they were in terrible condition, according to the investigators, to the prosecutors that are going to be involved in this case. When you look at that mugshot, what did you think?
I think my initial reaction was to judge her, and because she looks like a drug addict. That was my genuine initial reaction. And as I've learned more, I do think drugs were likely involved, but I question the level of captivity. I question it as not so much physical captivity, but coercive control and psychological captivity because of being in this relationship, or if you can call it a relationship, this abusive family for so long. But I do also, I want to see the victim for the victim, but I question at some point,
Or was she something else? Someone who had chances, real chances, to walk into a grocery store and ask a stranger for help and didn't take them. Dr. Dobson doesn't dodge that question, and her answer might surprise you. She said Elizabeth could be both, a victim and a person who made choices that hurt her own children. Not one or the other. Both at the same time. That's not a comfortable answer. It's not supposed to be.
You be mentally ill and criminally responsible, or is that what this is versus criminally responsible? Am I right? Like Elizabeth Siders, she can be mentally ill, but she can still be criminally responsible for what happened?
Yes. And in my opinion, I think she will be criminally responsible, because there are so many moments where she was out and about, where there were so many years that went by where she likely could have gotten help, where she was a victim and at the same time she was a perpetrator, preventing help for the children with them having cell phones and social medias. And, we have barely any information on this case, but what I'm seeing already shows me that she is a victim who also had selfish decisions that superseded the care of her children.
And when you say self decisions, how do you term that? Like, how do you define that?
Well, I think there were opportunities where she could have helped them or taken them to places that were cleaner and safer. They would go to the grocery store. She could have asked for help there. And I know even if she was under coercive control or Stockholm syndrome, there were still periods where she had an adult mind. And we'll find that out in the competency evaluation. How much of a mind.
Now I want to slow down for a second, because this next part isn't really about Elizabeth Siders. It's about you, watching this, at home, wondering how something like this happens in plain sight for years. And I don't have a clean answer for that. Nobody does. Not the clerk who watched her get led around a store by the elbow, quiet, head down. Not the neighbors.
4 of those adults, they were probably in such bad health. I mean, they had to let the grandfather out because he's probably going to croak any day.
I spoke to a clerk who had some interaction with her. She kept her head down. She had this, she had Gary Siders Jr. sort of leading her around by her elbow in the store. She was very quiet. They tried to give her hygiene products because it was so bad. They literally had to Lysol the store down when they left, according to this clerk. It was just, there were so many issues. But like the hygiene products, they kept on saying, well, that didn't seem like they used them. When you hear that, I want to understand, like, those are the kind of things that do you need to know as a forensic psychologist as you're trying to understand her state of mind?
Not the system that's supposed to catch this before it becomes 16 counts on a court docket. That failure, that's the part that sits with me longest out of everything in this case. Okay, building back up. Because there's more here, and it changes the shape of everything. Elizabeth isn't the only one facing this. Her husband, her in-laws, all of them are moving through some version of this same process right now. And every one of them, according to what's being reported, is expected to enter the same plea. Not guilty by reason of insanity. For adults, 16 children, one shared legal strategy.
To do, and we found that you are competent to stand trial.
Correct.
Okay, and that's when they would be able to kind of move forward with the legal system, as it were.
That's when I would assume they'll put forward a not guilty by reason of insanity plea. And I don't entirely understand that, because it would be for all 16 counts. So that's her entire life. So they're saying she was insane, didn't know that her actions had consequences for her entire life.
You would almost expect them to be saying, well, then she was held hostage, right? Like she was literally there against her will her entire life.
Right. But then why wouldn't they go for not guilty?
Think about what that actually means. For people, essentially saying, we were there, we did what the charges say we did, but we were not in our right minds when we did it. That's not a small claim to make. That's the whole case, resting on whether four separate adults can convince a court, and eventually a jury, that reality itself was distorted for all of them, for years, at the same time. And this is the part that connects to something much bigger than one family in Ohio. Right now, the same legal question is playing out in the Lindsay Clancy case, hundreds of miles away, from a completely different world. Different income level, different education, different everything, except for one thing. A mother, a jury, and the question of whether mental collapse erases criminal responsibility. Dr. Dobson said it herself. A judge in the Clancy case just had a conviction overturned.
Do you see an impact from a trial like Clancy and postpartum psychosis, like the worst of the worst? Like I hear voices and I do this horrible act with my children. Yeah. Do you see that rolling into cases like this where we're looking at a different mom who's had different issues with her multiple children?
I do, and I do because of the audience, because of your audience, because of my audience, because the judge in the Clancy case had a conviction overturned the other day. So a woman now gets to actually plead not guilty by reason of insanity because we pushed so hard. So if we keep pushing, we can keep building awareness and attention towards women's mental health and women's maternal mental health. And right now the world is watching, and this is when we make change, and we don't shut up, even if people are calling us dramatic.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because I mean, if you look at it, like it's extraordinary timing, as you know.
And that ruling doesn't stay contained to one courtroom. It sends a signal. It shapes what juries expect to hear next in cases just like this one. So when Elizabeth Siders finally walks into that courtroom, if she's found competent to walk in at all, she won't just be facing 16 counts of child endangerment. She'll be facing a legal landscape that's shifting under everyone's feet in real time. And still, none of this answers the question that matters most. What was actually happening inside that house, for years, while a system that's supposed to protect children looked the other way? We don't know yet. Nobody does. Not fully. The evaluation is still ongoing. The full truth of what happened to those 16 kids and what happened to Elizabeth herself long before she ever became a headline, that's still coming into focus. So I'll leave you with this. If a person can be both a victim and someone who caused real harm at the same time, what does accountability even look like for someone like that? Not sympathy, not outrage. Accountability. Type your answer below. I want to know where you land on this, because I genuinely don't think it's simple. Subscribe to the Hidden Case File, where the cases they buried finally come to light.